Stop. Take the time to question what you believe and think, because the unexamined life isn't worth living. This is the Whispering Atheist, where truth doesn't have to be loud. You can just whisper.
Recently, while watching a video of Dr. Richard Carrier, he mentioned the topic of blood magic. Now, this wasn't something I had thought a lot about, but after I watched the video, I began to think a little bit more about this idea of blood magic, which has been around probably since, the dawn of humans. The idea that blood has a special property. The Bible says that life is in the blood, and there's this belief that if you can get that blood, you have power in some ways. Now, today when we see people practicing this art of blood magic, we call it pagan or heathen. Christians might even say it's demonic, not realizing, of course, that their own scriptures support this basic idea of blood magic, that somehow there's magical powers or supernatural spiritual powers in the shedding of blood. The Bible itself says that without the shedding of blood, there's no remission of sins. And you can see that throughout the Old Testament, the shedding of blood was necessary for the forgiveness of sins. Now, this takes me back to the book of Genesis for just a moment, when we look at what was called the fall of man, where Adam and Eve were in the garden, Eve being tempted by the serpent to take the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. Once that was discovered by God, God became angry and cursed Adam and Eve and the serpent. And then God does something very interesting in that he kills animals to make coverings for Adam and Eve, who had made fig leaves for themselves, or some kind of garments out of leaves. I don't know if they were figs or not. But there's this shedding of blood, and yet there's no remission of sins at this point. The curse of Adam and Eve goes on, and they're cast out of the garden. And I just find this to be somewhat bizarre. And wondering about this God and this concept of blood atonement or blood magic, it seems to develop over time. We find out that in the story of Cain and Abel that they both bring an offering to God. Cain brings the fruit of his garden basically to God. And Abel, the younger of the two, brings a sacrifice from his flock of lambs. And God is enthralled and loves this blood sacrifice made by Abel. And Cain becomes upset by this, and then Cain, of course, kills his brother Abel. So I guess what I'm thinking is that once again you're seeing this barbaric theology developing. You're not dealing with a God who's all-knowing and all-powerful and all-present, but a God that is, like the human beings, developing a theology. But I just have to go back to Adam and Eve. Why wasn't that blood good enough for the remission of their sin? And if it was good enough, then the curse would have been null and void, and then you would not have the doctrine of original sin. Well, just keep thinking. Stop, take the time to question what you believe, and think, because the unexamined life isn't worth living. Thanks for listening to Audio Thoughts by the Whispering Atheist.